Yeah, they thought they could just throw me away like yesterday's newspaper, sell my house from under me, and stick me in some nursing home to die quietly. Well, guess what? I didn't just survive. I bought the entire company that manages their mortgage. My name is Margaret Hayes, and this is the story of how I turned my family's betrayal into the sweetest revenge you've ever heard. It all started 3 years ago when I was 78 years old. I had been living in my beautiful Victorian home in Portland, Oregon for 47 years. My late husband Robert and I had bought it when we were newlyweds, and every room held memories of our life together. The creaky floorboard in the hallway that would wake us up when our kids snuck out as teenagers. The kitchen where I taught my daughter Sarah how to make my grandmother's apple pie. The living room where Robert and I would sit by the fireplace every evening, him reading the paper while I worked on my quilting. But Robert had been gone for 5 years by then. And I'll admit, the house was getting harder to manage. The stairs were becoming more challenging, and the garden that I once tended with such pride was becoming overwhelming. But I wasn't ready to give up my independence. Not yet. My son Michael and my daughter Sarah had been having what they called concerned conversations about my living situation for months. They'd visit separately, always with that worried look in their eyes, asking questions about my health, my finances, my daily routine. I knew what they were thinking, but I wasn't some helpless old woman who couldn't take care of herself. I had been a successful real estate agent for 35 years before I retired. I understood property values, contracts, and most importantly, I understood people. I could read them like an open book. And what I was reading from my children wasn't concern. It was impatience mixed with a hefty dose of greed. The house was worth about $800,000, sitting on prime real estate in one of Portland's most desirable neighborhoods. It had appreciated significantly over the years, and I knew my kids were well aware of that fact. Michael worked in finance and was always talking about investment opportunities and leveraging assets. Sarah was a marketing executive who lived in an expensive condo downtown and was always complaining about money. The first red flag came when Michael suggested I should consider getting a reverse mortgage. "Mom, you're sitting on all this equity," he said during one of his visits. "You could free up some cash and still live in the house." But I'd done my research. Reverse mortgages were rarely good deals for the homeowner, and I suspected Michael was more interested in preserving his inheritance than helping me. The second red flag was when Sarah started bringing up assisted living facilities. "Mom, you'd have so much less to worry about," she'd say. "No more maintenance, no more yard work, meals provided. You could focus on enjoying your golden years." But every brochure she showed me looked like a prison with better wallpaper. I tried to explain to them that I wasn't ready to give up my home, that I was still mentally sharp and physically capable. Sure, I moved a little slower, and yes, I sometimes forgot where I put my reading glasses. But I was far from needing institutional care. I had friends in the neighborhood. I volunteered at the local library twice a week, and I was active in my church community. My life had meaning and purpose right where I was. But my children weren't listening. They had already made up their minds about what was best for me, and unfortunately, they had the legal means to make it happen. It started with small things. Michael began handling my finances, claiming he was just trying to help me organize my bills. Sarah started taking me to doctor appointments, always asking the doctors leading questions about my cognitive function and physical capabilities. They were building a case, and I was too trusting to see it coming. The trap was sprung on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in my kitchen making breakfast when Sarah arrived with a man in a suit. "Mom, this is Dr. Patterson," she said. "He's a geriatrician who specializes in cognitive assessments. We thought it would be good for you to have a complete evaluation." I should have refused. I should have asked more questions. But Sarah was my daughter, and despite everything, I trusted her. Dr. Patterson was charming and professional, asking me questions about my daily routine, my memory, my physical health. Some of the questions seemed odd. He asked me to count backwards from 100 by 7s, to draw a clock face, to remember a list of words after 15 minutes. But I answered everything to the best of my ability. 2 weeks later, I received a letter that changed everything. Dr. Patterson had determined that I was suffering from mild cognitive impairment and recommended immediate placement in a supervised living environment. The letter was copied to both of my children and apparently to a lawyer. That same day, Michael and Sarah arrived at my house with legal documents. They had obtained power of attorney over my financial and medical decisions, claiming I was no longer competent to make those choices myself. The paperwork was complex and intimidating, filled with legal jargon that made my head spin. They assured me it was just a formality, that they only wanted to help me. But help wasn't what I got. Within a week, they had put my house on the market. "Mom, you can't safely live here anymore," Michael explained with that patronizing tone that made my blood boil. "We found you a wonderful place at Sunset Manor. It's a beautiful facility with all the care you need. Sunset Manor. The name alone made me shudder. I drove by it once. A sterile, institutional building surrounded by a chain-link fence. The residents I saw sitting on the porch looked like they were just waiting to die. This wasn't assisted living. This was a warehouse for the elderly. I tried to fight it. I contacted a lawyer, but he told me that challenging a power of attorney was difficult and expensive, especially when there was medical documentation supporting my children's claims. The system was designed to protect people like me, but it was also designed to respect family decisions about care. My children were doing everything legally, even if it felt morally wrong. The house sold quickly, for $900,000, even more than I had estimated. Michael and Sarah told me the money would be used for my care, but I knew better. The cost of Sunset Manor was $3,000 a month. Even with inflation, that money should have lasted me decades, but I had a feeling it wouldn't. The day they moved me into Sunset Manor was the darkest day of my life. I was allowed to bring only a few personal items, some clothes, a couple of photo albums, and one small piece of furniture. Everything else, my lifetime of memories, my books, my quilts, my furniture, was either sold or donated. Sarah claimed there wasn't room for it all, but I knew they just wanted to liquidate everything as quickly as possible. My room at Sunset Manor was tiny, barely larger than a walk-in closet. I had a single bed, a small dresser, and a chair by the window that looked out onto the parking lot. The walls were institutional beige, and the fluorescent lighting made everything look sickly and pale. This was supposed to be my home for the rest of my life. The other residents were mostly in various stages of dementia or physical decline. During meals in the common dining room, I was surrounded by people who couldn't remember their own names or needed help eating. Don't get me wrong. They deserved compassion and care, but I didn't belong there. I was sharp, alert, and capable of independent living, but no one seemed to care about that. The staff treated me like I was already gone. They spoke to me in that sing-song voice people use with small children, asking if I needed help with the simplest tasks. They had a strict schedule for everything: meals, medications, activities, bedtime. I felt like I was in prison and my crime was getting old. But the worst part was the isolation. My children visited occasionally, always with that forced cheerfulness that made me want to scream. They'd ask how I was adjusting, comment on how nice the facility was, and then leave after an hour or two. My old friends from the neighborhood rarely visited. It was too far from where I used to live, and honestly, I think places like Sunset Manor made them uncomfortable. They were reminders of what could happen to any of us. I fell into a deep depression. For the first time in my life, I felt truly helpless. I had been independent, strong, and self-sufficient for 78 years, and now I was being told when to eat, when to sleep, and when to take my medications. I stopped reading, stopped participating in the facility's activities, and spent most of my time staring out that window at the parking lot. It was during one of those endless afternoons that I overheard a conversation that would change everything. 2 staff members were talking in the hallway outside my room, and they didn't realize I could hear them. "Did you hear about the Hayes family?" one of them said. "Apparently they're having some kind of financial trouble. Something about their mortgage payments." "Really? I thought they were well off. They seemed pretty flush when they moved Margaret in here." "Yeah, well, apparently not." I heard from someone who knows Sarah that they're behind on their payments. Both of them bought expensive houses assuming they'd have access to Margaret's money, but the facility costs are higher than they expected. I sat up straighter, my heart racing. They were having money problems? After stealing my house and my independence, they were struggling financially? A plan began to form in my mind. A dangerous, probably crazy plan, but a plan nonetheless. That evening, I called the one person I knew I could trust. My old friend and former colleague, Janet Morrison. Janet had been my partner in the real estate business for 20 years, and she was the only person who had visited me regularly at Sunset Manor. More importantly, she had been furious about what my children had done to me. "Janet, I need your help," I said when she answered the phone. "I want to find out everything you can about Michael and Sarah's financial situation. Specifically, I want to know who holds their mortgages." Janet was quiet for a moment. "Margaret, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that maybe it's time I reminded my children who they're dealing with. I might be old, but I'm not stupid, and I'm certainly not powerless." Over the next few weeks, Janet became my secret weapon. She used her connections in the real estate and banking industries to dig up information about my children's financial situations. What she found was even better than I'd hoped. Michael had bought a $600,000 house in an upscale suburb, putting down only 10% and taking out a jumbo mortgage. His monthly payments were over $3,000, which was manageable on his finance industry salary. But he had also taken out a home equity line of credit to fund some failed investments. He was leveraged to the hilt. Sarah's situation was even more precarious. She had bought a luxury condo downtown for $400,000, but she had also leased an expensive car and was living well beyond her means. Her mortgage payments, combined with her other debts, were eating up most of her income. Both of their mortgages were held by the same company, Pacific Northwest Mortgage Solutions, a mid-sized regional lender that specialized in jumbo loans in the Portland area. And here's where it got interesting. Pacific Northwest Mortgage Solutions was struggling financially. They had made too many risky loans during the real estate boom, and now they were facing potential bankruptcy. Janet brought me all this information during one of her visits, and I felt alive for the first time in months. I had spent my entire adult life in real estate and finance. I understood markets, I understood debt, and I understood opportunity. My children had made a crucial mistake. They had underestimated me. "Janet, I need you to do something else for me," I said, my mind racing with possibilities. "I want you to contact Pacific Northwest Mortgage Solutions and tell them I'm interested in discussing an investment opportunity." "Margaret, what are you planning?" "I'm planning to buy their company, or at least buy enough of it to have control over my children's mortgages." Janet stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "With what money?" "Your children control your finances." I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. "Janet, my dear friend, my children may control my bank accounts, but they don't control everything. Do you remember that storage unit I rented about 10 years ago?" Janet's eyes widened. "The one where you put all of Robert's collectibles?" "That's right. Robert collected rare coins, stamps, and vintage watches for 40 years. After he died, I couldn't bear to sell them, so I put them in storage. I never told Michael or Sarah about them, because they were too special, too personal. But desperate times call for desperate measures. Over the next month, Janet and I worked together to quietly liquidate Robert's collection. It was heartbreaking to sell pieces that had meant so much to him, but I knew he would have understood. The coins alone were worth over $200,000. Robert had always had an eye for valuable pieces. The stamps and watches brought in another $100,000. Combined with the small savings account that I had managed to keep secret from my children, I had enough capital to make a serious offer. But I needed more than just money. I needed expertise and connections. That's when Janet suggested I contact her nephew, David Morrison, who was a corporate lawyer specializing in acquisitions and mergers. David had always been fond of me, and when Janet explained the situation, he was more than happy to help. "Mrs. Hayes, what you're proposing is definitely possible," David told me during our first meeting. "Pacific Northwest Mortgage Solutions is indeed in financial distress. They've been looking for a buyer or investor for months. With your capital and the right legal structure, we could potentially acquire a controlling interest in the company. What kind of legal structure? I asked. We'd set up a limited liability company with you as the primary investor. That way, your children won't be able to trace the ownership back to you immediately. We'll call it something generic. Maybe Northwest Capital Holdings. You'd own 60%, which would give you control over major decisions, including loan modifications and foreclosure procedures. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. I would buy control of the company that held my children's mortgages, and then I would have the power to make their lives as difficult as they had made mine. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. The acquisition process took 3 months. David handled all the legal work, while Janet managed the financial logistics. Pacific Northwest Mortgage Solutions was so desperate for capital that they barely questioned where the money was coming from. All they cared about was that Northwest Capital Holdings had the funds to keep them afloat. During this time, I played the role of the confused, declining elderly woman perfectly. When my children visited, I acted more forgetful than usual, complained about the facility, and generally seemed to be deteriorating. They were so convinced of my helplessness that they never suspected I was orchestrating a complex business acquisition from my nursing home room. The day the acquisition was finalized was the happiest day I'd experienced since Robert died. I was officially the controlling owner of Pacific Northwest Mortgage Solutions, which meant I had direct control over Michael and Sarah's mortgages. But I didn't act immediately. I wanted to savor the moment and plan my next moves carefully. The first thing I did was have David conduct a thorough review of my children's mortgage terms. What I found was fascinating. Both Michael and Sarah had been making their payments on time, but they were both barely meeting their minimum obligations. Michael's home equity line of credit was maxed out, and Sarah had missed 2 payments the previous year before catching up. They were both walking financial tightropes. My opportunity came sooner than expected. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates, and both of my children's mortgages had variable rate components. Under normal circumstances, the rate increases would have been phased in gradually, but I had the power to accelerate the timeline. I instructed my mortgage company to send both Michael and Sarah notices that their monthly payments would be increasing by $800 each, effective immediately. The letters were perfectly legal. Buried in the fine print of their mortgage agreements was language that allowed for immediate rate adjustments under certain economic conditions. The phone calls started within days. First Sarah, then Michael, both calling the mortgage company to complain about the sudden payment increases. They were told that the increases were legal and necessary given the current economic climate. They asked to speak to supervisors, threatened to contact lawyers, and generally made nuisances of themselves. But the answer was always the same. The increases were valid, and the payments were due. I watched from my nursing home room as my children's comfortable lives began to unravel. Sarah called me, crying about how she might have to sell her condo. Michael visited, looking stressed and asking if I had any suggestions for financial assistance. The irony was delicious. They were asking the woman they had declared incompetent for financial advice. But I wasn't done. The payment increases were just the beginning. Next, I instructed the mortgage company to begin rigorous inspections of both properties. They found minor violations. Michael's deck railing was an inch too low according to current building codes, and Sarah's condo had a small water stain on the ceiling that could indicate structural issues. Both were given 30 days to make expensive repairs or face potential foreclosure proceedings. The stress was getting to them. Sarah looked terrible when she visited. Dark circles under her eyes, her usually perfect hair disheveled. Michael had developed a nervous tic and was constantly checking his phone for messages from the mortgage company. They were experiencing the same helplessness and anxiety that I had felt when they took control of my life. But the coup de grace came when I discovered that both of them had been dipping into the funds that were supposed to be paying for my care at Sunset Manor. David's investigation revealed that they had been using my money to make their mortgage payments for months. They had committed what amounted to elder abuse and fraud. I could have had them arrested. I could have sued them for everything they had. But I had a better idea. I was going to give them a choice. The same kind of choice they had given me. I arranged for David to contact both Michael and Sarah for a meeting at his law office. They were told it was about some complications with their mortgages, and that they needed to attend immediately. They arrived separately, both looking haggard and desperate. David led them into the conference room where I was waiting. The looks on their faces when they saw me, alert, well-dressed and clearly in command of my faculties, was worth every penny I had spent on this elaborate scheme. "Hello, Michael. Hello, Sarah," I said calmly. "I think we need to have a conversation about your financial situations." Sarah found her voice first. "Mom, what are you doing here? How did you get out of the facility?" "I didn't get out of anywhere, dear. I signed myself out. You see, I was never actually incompetent to begin with. Dr. Patterson's evaluation was paid for by you, and his conclusions were, shall we say, influenced by the results you wanted to achieve." Michael's face had gone pale. "I don't understand. What's going on? What's going on, son? Is that you're both about to lose your homes? Unless, of course, you'd like to accept my help. You see, I own the company that holds your mortgages. I am Pacific Northwest Mortgage Solutions, or at least the controlling shareholder." The silence in the room was deafening. I could see them processing the information, trying to understand how their helpless old mother had outmaneuvered them so completely. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. "Oh, it's very possible. And it's very real. You see, children, you made a fundamental error in judgment. You assumed that because I was old, I was also stupid. You assumed that because I needed help with some physical tasks, I was mentally incompetent. You assumed that because I trusted you, I was naive. All of those assumptions were wrong. I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. This folder contains evidence of your financial crimes. You've been using my money that was supposed to pay for my care, to make your mortgage payments. That's elder abuse, fraud, and embezzlement. I could have you both arrested today." Michael leaned forward. "Mom, please let us explain." "Explain what? How you sold my house without my real consent. How you put me in a nursing home against my will. How you stole my money to pay for your own debts. What possible explanation could justify what you've done to me?" Sarah was crying now. "We thought we were doing what was best for you. We were worried about your safety. Were you worried about my safety, or were you worried about your inheritance? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were more concerned about liquidating my assets than protecting my well-being." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Portland skyline. "Here's what's going to happen. You have two choices. Choice one, I call the police, have you both arrested for elder abuse and fraud, and let the legal system sort everything out. Your careers will be over, you'll likely go to prison, and you'll definitely lose your homes." I turned back to face them. "Choice two, you sign these documents." I placed 2 thick contracts on the table. "These are agreements that will restructure your mortgages. Your payments will be reduced to manageable levels, and you'll have reasonable timelines to address any property issues. In exchange, you'll return every penny you stole from me, plus interest. You'll also agree to certain conditions about your future behavior." Michael picked up one of the contracts. "What kind of conditions?" "First, you'll have no access to my finances ever again. David will handle all of my financial affairs from now on. Second, you'll contribute to a fund that will pay for my actual care needs, if and when I need them. Third, you'll both attend family therapy to address the issues that led to this situation. And finally, you'll both write me letters of apology. Real apologies, not the fake ones you've been giving me." Sarah looked up through her tears. "And if we agree to all of this, then you get to keep your homes, your careers, and your freedom. But you'll be doing it with the knowledge that I'm watching. Any future attempts to manipulate me, control me, or take advantage of me will result in immediate foreclosure and prosecution." The room was quiet for a long time. I could see them weighing their options, trying to find some way out of the trap they had walked into. But there wasn't one. I had them cornered, just like they had cornered me. Finally, Michael spoke. "What about the nursing home? Are you going back to Sunset Manor?" I laughed. A genuine, joyful laugh. Absolutely not. I'm moving back into my house. Oh, didn't I mention? I bought it back from the people you sold it to. They were very understanding when I explained the situation. Apparently, they had elderly parents of their own and were horrified by what had happened to me. You bought back your own house? Sarah asked incredulously. Yes, dear. For $950,000. A bit more than you sold it for, but I considered it a fair price for justice. Don't worry, though. I'm not taking it out of your inheritance. I'm taking it out of the money you stole from me. Over the next hour, with David's guidance, both Michael and Sarah signed the agreements. They had no choice. The alternative was too devastating to consider. They agreed to all of my conditions, including the repayment plan that would take them several years to complete. But the most satisfying part came when they had to read their apology letters aloud. Michael's was stilted and formal, clearly written under duress. But Sarah's was different. As she read it, I could see real remorse in her eyes. She talked about how she had let fear and greed cloud her judgment, how she had stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a problem to be solved. I'm sorry, Mom, she said when she finished reading. I'm sorry for not listening to you. I'm sorry for not respecting your autonomy. I'm sorry for treating you like you were already gone instead of like you were still here. Still you. For the first time in months, I saw my daughter instead of my adversary. It didn't excuse what she had done, but it gave me hope that maybe, eventually, we could rebuild our relationship. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. I moved back into my beloved house, and it felt like coming back to life. Janet helped me hire a part-time housekeeper and a gardener to help with the maintenance. But I maintained my independence. I was still the same sharp, capable woman I'd always been. My relationship with my children slowly began to heal. The family therapy sessions were difficult. There were tears, angry words, and painful truths. But gradually, we started to understand each other better. Michael admitted that he had been under enormous financial pressure and had convinced himself that controlling my assets was the responsible thing to do. Sarah revealed that she had been terrified of losing me and thought that putting me in a controlled environment would keep me safe. Neither of those explanations justified what they had done, but they helped me understand the fear and desperation that had driven their actions. We were all getting older, and none of us knew how to handle the changing dynamics of our family. The most important thing that came out of those therapy sessions was the establishment of clear boundaries and expectations. My children learned that aging doesn't automatically mean incompetence, and that elder care decisions should be made with the elderly person, not for them. I learned that I needed to communicate my needs and wishes more clearly, and that asking for help isn't the same as giving up independence. Pacific Northwest Mortgage Solutions, under my ownership, became a model for ethical lending practices. I hired new management focused on working with borrowers to find solutions rather than rushing to foreclosure. We developed programs to help elderly homeowners stay in their homes safely, and we partnered with local organizations to provide financial education and support. It wasn't just about making money. It was about making a difference. I had learned firsthand how vulnerable elderly people could be to financial exploitation, and I wanted to use my position to protect others from similar experiences. The business was successful beyond my wildest dreams. Within 2 years, we had expanded to 3 states and had been recognized by industry publications for our innovative approach to mortgage lending. More importantly, we had helped hundreds of families avoid foreclosure and keep their homes. But the real victory was personal. I had reclaimed my life, my independence, and my sense of self-worth. I was no longer the helpless old woman my children had tried to make me into. I was Margaret Hayes, businesswoman, homeowner, and survivor. Today, 5 years after this whole ordeal began, I'm 83 years old and still going strong. I live in my own house, run my own business, and make my own decisions. My children and I have rebuilt our relationship, though it's different than it was before. There's more honesty now, more respect, and clearer boundaries. Michael has become much more responsible with his finances and has actually joined the board of directors for one of my company's community outreach programs. Sarah has moved to a smaller, more affordable place and has started working part-time at a nonprofit that serves elderly clients. She says our experience taught her about the importance of listening to older adults, rather than making assumptions about their capabilities. I still volunteer at the library. I still tend my garden, and I still have coffee with Janet every Tuesday morning. But now I also have the satisfaction of knowing that I fought back against injustice and won. I didn't just survive my children's betrayal. I turned it into something positive. The nursing home where I spent those terrible months has since been shut down for violations of patient care standards. Some of the residents were moved to better facilities, and I've personally helped several families navigate the complex world of elder care options. No one should have to experience what I went through. People often ask me if I've forgiven my children, and the answer is complicated. I've forgiven them in the sense that I no longer carry anger and resentment in my heart. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean pretending that what happened was acceptable. It means choosing to move forward without being consumed by bitterness. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that age is not a disease. And getting older doesn't mean giving up your voice, your choices, or your dignity. Too many elderly people are pushed aside, ignored, or treated as problems to be solved, rather than people to be respected. That needs to change. I also learned that it's never too late to fight back. At 78, I felt like my life was over. At 83, I feel like I'm just getting started. I've written a book about my experience. I speak at conferences about elder rights, and I'm working on legislation to protect elderly people from financial exploitation by family members. The system that allowed my children to take control of my life so easily needs to be reformed. Power of attorney laws need stronger safeguards. Competency evaluations need to be more rigorous and unbiased. And there need to be better advocacy services for elderly people who find themselves in situations like mine. But most importantly, we need to change how we think about aging. Getting older doesn't mean becoming less valuable, less capable, or less deserving of respect. It means gaining experience, wisdom, and perspective that younger people haven't had the chance to develop yet. My story isn't unique. Every day, elderly people across America are having their autonomy stripped away by well-meaning family members who think they know what's best. Some of these situations are genuinely necessary. There are elderly people who do need protection and care, but too many are like mine, driven by impatience, greed, or misguided assumptions about what it means to be old. If you're an elderly person facing a similar situation, know that you have rights, you have options, and you have value. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. If you're a younger person dealing with aging parents, remember that your parents are still people with their own thoughts, feelings, and desires. Include them in decisions about their lives, listen to their concerns, and respect their autonomy as much as possible. And if you're someone who works with elderly people, whether as a healthcare provider, a social worker, a lawyer, or in any other capacity, remember that every elderly person was once young, accomplished, and independent. They deserve to be treated with the same respect and dignity that you would want for yourself. My house is full of life again. I host dinner parties. I have visitors constantly, and I'm always working on some new project or initiative. The rooms that once felt empty and sad are now filled with laughter, conversation, and purpose. This is what growing older should look like. Not a gradual withdrawal from life, but a continued engagement with the world around us. The garden that I thought I'd never tend again is more beautiful than ever. Janet and I redesigned it to be more manageable, but it's still mine. Every morning I walk through it with my coffee, checking on the flowers, planning new plantings, and enjoying the peace and beauty that comes from nurturing growing things. I've also reconnected with old friends and made new ones. The isolation I felt at Sunset Manor is gone, replaced by a rich social life filled with people who value my company and my contributions. Age doesn't have to mean loneliness, and retirement doesn't have to mean irrelevance. Sometimes I think about the woman I was 5 years ago, depressed, defeated, and convinced that her life was over. I wish I could tell her that her story wasn't ending. It was just beginning a new chapter. I wish I could tell her that she was stronger than she knew, smarter than anyone gave her credit for, and that her best days were still ahead of her. But maybe that's the point of telling this story. Maybe there's someone out there who needs to hear that it's never too late to fight back. It's never too late to reclaim your life. And it's never too late to prove that you're not finished yet. The mortgage company continues to thrive, and I've started mentoring other elderly entrepreneurs who want to start businesses or make career changes later in life. Age discrimination is real, but it's not insurmountable. Experience, wisdom, and determination can be powerful advantages in the business world. I've also become something of a local celebrity. Local news stations have done stories about my business success, and I've been invited to speak at universities, business groups, and senior centers. The message is always the same. Don't let anyone tell you that you're too old to matter, too old to contribute, or too old to fight for what's right. My story has also inspired others to examine their own family dynamics and elder care plans. I've received hundreds of letters from people who have either experienced similar situations or who want to make sure they don't repeat my children's mistakes with their own aging parents. The relationship with Michael and Sarah continues to evolve. We'll never have the same trusting relationship we had before, but we've built something new. Something based on mutual respect and clear communication. They've both learned valuable lessons about assumption, control, and the importance of listening to their elders. Michael has become particularly interested in the financial literacy programs our company offers. He's seen firsthand how financial stress can drive people to make desperate decisions, and he wants to help others avoid the mistakes he made. Sarah has become an advocate for elderly rights in her community, using her marketing skills to raise awareness about elder abuse and financial exploitation. The house continues to be my sanctuary, but it's also become a gathering place for the community. I host monthly meetings for elderly rights advocates. I've started a reading group for seniors, and I regularly have young entrepreneurs over for mentoring sessions. The house that my children thought was too much for me to handle has become the center of a thriving network of relationships and activities. I've also started a scholarship fund for elderly people who want to go back to school or start new careers. Too many people think that learning stops at a certain age. But I've seen the excitement and satisfaction that comes from acquiring new skills and knowledge at any stage of life. The legal reforms I've been working on are slowly making progress. Several states have strengthened their power of attorney laws, and there's growing awareness about the need for better safeguards against elder abuse. It's slow work, but it's important work. Looking back on everything that's happened, I'm actually grateful for the experience. It was painful, it was scary, and it was unfair, but it also taught me things about myself that I never would have learned otherwise. I discovered reserves of strength, determination, and resilience that I didn't know I possessed. I also learned that revenge, when it's really justice, can be incredibly satisfying. I didn't just get even with my children. I created something positive from their betrayal. The mortgage company helps families, the advocacy work protects other elderly people, and the story itself inspires others to fight back against injustice. Most importantly, I learned that my story wasn't over. At 78, I thought I was in the final chapter of my life. At 83, I realize I'm probably somewhere in the middle of the book. There's still so much I want to do, so much I want to contribute, and so much life left to live. The best part of each day is still the morning walk through my garden. The flowers don't care how old I am. The birds don't treat me differently because of my age. And the sun feels just as warm on my face as it did when I was 25. Nature doesn't recognize artificial boundaries like age or social expectations about what elderly people can and can't do. I've also started traveling again. Something I thought I'd never be able to do after being placed in that nursing home. Last year I took a cruise to Alaska with Janet. This year I'm planning a trip to Europe to visit some of the business conferences where I've been invited to speak. The world is still full of possibilities, and I'm not ready to stop exploring it. The mortgage company has expanded internationally, and I've been working with organizations in other countries to develop ethical lending practices for elderly borrowers. It's fascinating to see how different cultures approach aging and elder care. And I've learned that the problems I faced aren't unique to America. I've also become a mentor to other women who have faced similar situations. There's something powerful about sharing your story with someone who truly understands what you've been through. These women come from all walks of life, but they all share the experience of being underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed because of their age. One of my mentees, Dorothy, was 82 when her son convinced her to sign over her farm to him. She thought she was just making estate planning easier, but he immediately sold the property and moved her into a tiny apartment. When she came to me, she was devastated and convinced there was nothing she could do. But we found legal grounds to challenge the transfer, and she eventually got her farm back. She's now 85 and still working the land she loves. Another woman, Patricia, had her daughter take control of her finances and then systematically drain her accounts. Patricia was a retired teacher who had saved diligently for 40 years. But within 2 years, most of her money was gone. We were able to trace the transactions, prove the theft, and get most of her money back. Patricia now volunteers with our financial literacy program, teaching other elderly people how to protect themselves from financial exploitation. These stories remind me that my experience, while painful, has given me a platform to help others. Every person I can help avoid what I went through makes the whole ordeal worthwhile. Every law that gets changed, every family that has better communication, every elderly person who maintains their autonomy. These are the real victories. The relationship with my grandchildren has also been transformed by this experience. They're now adults, and they initially struggled to understand what their parents had done to me. But as they've gotten older and started thinking about their own futures, they've begun to appreciate the importance of treating elderly family members with respect and dignity. My oldest granddaughter, Emily, is now studying elder law in graduate school. She says my story inspired her to want to help protect elderly people from the kind of exploitation I faced. My grandson, James, works in finance like his father, but he's made it his specialty to help elderly clients maintain control of their assets while still planning for their future care needs. The transformation in my children has been gradual, but real. Michael now serves on the board of an organization that provides free legal services to elderly people facing financial abuse. He's used his experience, both as someone who committed elder abuse and as someone who faced financial consequences, to educate others about the warning signs and legal implications of these situations. Sarah has become a powerful advocate for elderly rights, using her marketing background to create awareness campaigns about elder abuse. She's particularly focused on the subtle forms of abuse that families might not recognize. The gradual erosion of an elderly person's autonomy, the dismissal of their opinions and preferences, and the assumption that age equals incompetence. The most meaningful part of our healing process has been their acknowledgement that they were wrong. Not just about the specific actions they took, but about their fundamental assumptions about aging and independence. They've both told me that they now understand that getting older doesn't mean becoming less valuable or less capable of making decisions. I think about Robert often, and I believe he would be proud of how I handled this situation. He always said I was tougher than I looked, and he would have loved seeing me turn my children's betrayal into a successful business venture. He also would have appreciated the irony. His coin collection, which he spent decades building, ended up being the key to my revenge. The house is full of new memories now, but I still treasure the old ones. I've kept Robert's workshop exactly as he left it, and I sometimes go there just to feel close to him. I think he would have understood why I had to fight back, and he would have supported my decision to help other elderly people facing similar situations. I've also made peace with the aging process itself. I'm not the same person I was at 40, or even at 70, but I'm still me. I move a little slower, I get tired more easily, and I have to be more careful about my health. But my mind is sharp, my spirit is strong, and my capacity for growth and change hasn't diminished. The key is accepting the changes that come with aging while refusing to accept limitations that are imposed by others. There's a difference between acknowledging that you need help with certain tasks and allowing others to take control of your entire life. The challenge is knowing where to draw that line and having the courage to defend it. I've also learned the importance of planning for the future without surrendering the present. It's wise to think about what kind of care you might need as you age. But it's not necessary to give up your independence prematurely. There are many options between complete independence and institutional care, and families need to explore all of them before making drastic decisions. The advocacy work I do now focuses on education, both for elderly people and for their families. Elderly people need to know their rights, understand their options, and have access to resources when they're facing difficult situations. Families need to understand that good intentions don't justify taking away an elderly person's autonomy without their consent. I've also become involved in policy work, lobbying for better protections for elderly people and stronger penalties for elder abuse. The laws vary significantly from state to state, and there are too many loopholes that allow family members to exploit elderly relatives without consequences. One of the most important reforms I'm pushing for is mandatory cooling-off periods for major financial decisions involving elderly people. Too many elderly people are pressured into signing documents they don't fully understand, often by family members who claim to have their best interests at heart. A waiting period would give them time to seek independent advice and fully consider their options. I'm also advocating for better training for healthcare providers, social workers, and others who work with elderly people. Too many professionals accept family members' assessments of an elderly person's capabilities without conducting their own independent evaluations. This makes it easier for manipulative family members to get medical or legal support for their actions. The business continues to grow and evolve. We've added new services, including financial counseling for elderly borrowers and educational programs about avoiding foreclosure. We've also partnered with local organizations to provide emergency assistance to elderly people facing housing crises. But the most rewarding part of the business is the thank you letters I receive from people we've helped. Last month, I got a letter from an 80-year-old woman who was able to stay in her home because we worked with her to modify her mortgage after her husband died. She said our compassionate approach reminded her that there are still good people in the world who care about others. I've also started a monthly newsletter for elderly people, sharing stories of empowerment, information about resources, and tips for maintaining independence. It's grown to thousands of subscribers, and I regularly receive contributions from readers who want to share their own experiences and advice. The newsletter has become a community in itself. Readers connect with each other, share resources, and support each other through difficult times. It's proof that elderly people don't want to be isolated or forgotten. They want to be part of something meaningful and connected to others who understand their experiences. Looking ahead, I have many plans for the future. I'm working on a second book, this one focused on practical advice for elderly people who want to maintain their independence, and for families who want to support their aging relatives without overstepping boundaries. I'm also developing a documentary about elder abuse and financial exploitation, hoping to reach an even wider audience with this important message. I'm planning to expand the business to more states, always with the same focus on ethical practices and customer service. I want to create a national model for how mortgage companies should treat elderly borrowers, with respect, patience, and a commitment to finding solutions rather than rushing to foreclose. I'm also working on establishing a foundation that will provide legal assistance to elderly people facing financial abuse from family members. Too many people in situations like mine can't afford the legal help they need to fight back, and I want to change that. The most important thing I want people to understand is that this story isn't really about revenge. It's about justice and empowerment. I didn't fight back because I wanted to hurt my children. I fought back because what they did was wrong, and because I knew that if I didn't stand up for myself, no one else would. Too many elderly people accept mistreatment because they've been conditioned to believe that their opinions don't matter anymore, that their families know what's best for them, or that fighting back is undignified or futile. But dignity comes from standing up for yourself, not from quietly accepting injustice. I also want families to understand that there are better ways to handle concerns about aging relatives. Start by having honest conversations about preferences, fears, and expectations. Include the elderly person in all discussions about their future. Get multiple opinions before making major decisions. And always remember that getting older doesn't automatically mean losing the right to make your own choices. The transformation in my own family has been profound. We now have monthly family meetings where we discuss concerns, make plans, and ensure that everyone's voice is heard. Michael and Sarah have both said that they wish we'd been communicating this way years ago, and that many of the problems could have been avoided if they had just talked to me instead of making assumptions about what I wanted or needed. My grandchildren have also learned important lessons about aging, respect, and family dynamics. They've seen firsthand how devastating it can be when families don't communicate effectively, and they've committed to doing better with their own aging parents someday. The ripple effects of this experience continue to spread. The reforms I've advocated for have been adopted in several states. The business practices I've implemented have been copied by other mortgage companies. The awareness campaigns Sarah has developed have reached thousands of families. And the story itself has inspired countless other elderly people to stand up for their rights. But perhaps the most important impact has been on my own sense of self-worth and purpose. 5 years ago, I felt like my life was over, like I was just a burden waiting to die. Today I feel more alive and purposeful than I have in years. I have work that matters, relationships that fulfill me, and a future that excites me. This experience taught me that it's never too late to reinvent yourself, to fight for what's right, or to make a difference in the world. Age is just a number, and growing older doesn't mean growing less powerful or less relevant. In many ways, the wisdom and experience that come with age can make you more effective, not less. I'm now 83 years old, and I'm not slowing down. I have goals to achieve, people to help, and changes to make. I have a business to run, a foundation to establish, and a world to change. Most importantly, I have a life to live. On my own terms, in my own way, with my own choices. The house that my children thought was too much for me to handle has become the headquarters of a movement. The woman they thought was too old and confused to make her own decisions has become a successful businesswoman and advocate. The situation they thought they had under control became the catalyst for their own transformation. Every morning when I wake up in my own bed, in my own house, surrounded by my own things, I'm reminded that I won, not just against my children, but against a system that tries to convince elderly people that they're powerless. Not just for myself, but for all the elderly people who have been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. My story proves that it's never too late to fight back, never too late to reclaim your power, and never too late to write a new chapter in your life. Age might slow you down, but it doesn't have to stop you. Experience might change you, but it doesn't have to defeat you. And family might disappoint you, but it doesn't have to destroy you. I'm Margaret Hayes. I'm 83 years old, and I'm just getting started. This is my story, and I'm proud of every chapter, even the difficult ones. Because in the end, it's not about how old you are or what obstacles you face. It's about how you choose to respond when life knocks you down. And I chose to get back up, fight back, and win. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's living well, making a difference, and proving that you're stronger than anyone ever imagined, including yourself.